It's not uncommon for great things to go unnoticed. From the ambitious to the modest, all things can be objectively judged on their sales figures. However, the commercial success of something doesn't always mean it's great. But this doesn't mean objective failure can't be good, which leads me nicely onto the Lars, the self-titled one-album wonder that should have been a hit. So without further ado, let's let the needle hit the groove. So the perfect track to open, named Son of a Gun, immediately sets the tone for the record, clearly taking influence from the Mersey beat scene and acts from the 60s, but it does it in a way to make it feel fresh, and they do their own thing with it. The next track, titled I Can't Sleep, becomes instantly recognisable with the 3 power chord structure, again taking clear influence from what sounds like The Who. They again excel at making it their own. It sounds familiar enough to be recognisable, but unique enough to sound new, and they somehow manage to make it sound big without distortion. The following track, named Timeless Melody, simply is a perfect pop song. It's got a perfect progression, the melody is catchy and hypnotic, it's that great, and in honesty it never gets old. It's the kind of song they could have played over and over without overstaying its welcome, but that's something that could have been said for anything on this album. Liberty Ship plays next, however this one has a quieter arrangement than the previous tracks, having a more stripped down production and no reliance on electric guitars. This one definitely took inspiration from the mid-60s rock and roll scene. It's what Boris the Spider and Magic Bus combined would have sounded like. The most popular and well-known song plays after, There She Goes, and where to even begin with this, it's simply timeless. It could be released tomorrow and still sound fresh. It'd be hard for a new listener to guess just how old this is, and I think that's the mark of a truly great piece of music. Aside from the perfect melody and arrangement, you can't help but at least hum along to it. Even if you don't know the lyrics, it's very hard to not sing along when you already know them. But that could be said for anything on this album. The next one, titled Doldrum, feels reminiscent of folk and rockabilly. It's quite refreshing to have something different yet not feel out of place at the same time. It honestly wouldn't have worked with anything else, but this just seems to work so well. It's enhanced by the harmonies that were recorded wonderfully and mixed to just the right levels. Feeling plays after. This probably is the most Beatles sounding non-Beatles song ever. This legitimately could have been on a hard day's night and no one would question its existence. It's really enhanced by the catchy melody. Way Out shortly follows, and it starts with an instantly recognisable riff, which this album didn't really rely on riffs to drive the songs, so it's nice to hear something that dares to be different and succeeded in what it set out to do. This one is really the full package. Everything about the song is memorable. IOU is the follow-up, and man is it catchy. I also think it's perfectly structured and put together, but that's nothing out of ordinary for this record. Freedom Song kicks off after. This one is clearly a tribute to the Kinks. It employs a softer and quieter tone, and I guess it's kind of hard to pay homage without sounding like another song, but they honestly pulled it off yet again. Second to last is named Failure. I think they wanted to go out with a bang, as this one is much bigger and bolder than everything that came before it. Using distorted guitars and a much bigger sound than everything else, it seems to fit in quite nicely where it is. I honestly think it might not have worked if it came anywhere else. And finally, closing off is Looking Glass, and what can I say about this one? It's probably the best song on it. The arrangement is different, but as easily as good as everything else. All of what made the prior songs great all culminates together, and this is the result. It's quite simply the best way to end an already brilliant album. And that's every track. Honestly can't say enough good things about this album. Not a single beat is wasted, nothing feels out of place, and nothing gives the impression it's thrown in just to pad the runtime. There's not a bad song on it, there's not a single point where you want to click skip. Every song is just as good as the one that came before, and definitely the one that follows. As none of them overstay their welcome by running too long, which I guess leads me to my only real complaint about it. I usually complain about an album's length, but this one just simply needed to be longer. It's kind of like leaving a restaurant without having dessert. You're left satisfied, but you still want more. But in its short runtime, they managed to revive the 60s rock and roll scene and pulled off keeping it fresh, and honestly doesn't sound dated at all. Overall, when I think about the relative commercial failure of this album, I genuinely think it's just down to bad timing. It came out at a time when Manchester and electric dance music really ruled the scene. Grunge hadn't taken off, and Britpop certainly hadn't begun. I think it was quite ahead of its time in that respect. Would it have been a hit 3 or maybe 4 years later? It's hard to say, but I certainly think it would have been. Well, I think that about covers it. Signing off.